Hey all, thanks for joining. Back here another day, making another video on PowerShell basics. Today I'm going to be going over functions. In PowerShell, you would want to use functions to create reusability in your code. There are a few things to note in functions when declaring them in PowerShell. You have to designate the name function before a approved verb. I recommend using approved verbs. You can look that up on Microsoft's website. So they have a syntax that you would want to follow when declaring function names. Usually it has a verb and then a description for what the actual function is doing. So I created one here. This is just a really basic example. I called it new name value pair. Name value pair in PowerShell is kind of like just a hash table, if you know what those are, or hash set. It just is a value that is designated by a name and then a value. So you'll see here, I create a function declaring it with the keyword function, then I give it a name, and then I open up my squiggly brackets and it ends down here. So once you do that, the body of your function is then declared. So I'll remove that. You can see the squiggly brackets and then the closing bracket. So you have open and close. Typically you'll want to put the open bracket on the line just after you declare the name, and then the closing bracket after the rest of your internal code. You'll also want to make sure you keep consistent tabbing here, just so your functions are easier to read. So outside of the structure, I'll start going into the next few lines here. On functions, you have the ability to provide arguments as parameters for the function. So you can see here that I've added a parameter called name and value. The name is a type of string, and I also went over PowerShell objects in a different video on PowerShell basics, so if you want to review that one first, you can just go ahead and go back and review that one first. But here it's a type string for both of these, and on one of them there's also parameter attributes that you can add to them. So it's a little more advanced, but this is probably the most common one that you'll want to add. So basically all this is saying is that this is a parameter and it's a mandatory parameter. So I'm just specifying the property mandatory equals true. So that means when you actually want to use this function, you have to at least provide a name. The next one here is also type string value, but what I did is assigned it a default value. So if you do not provide the option value as a parameter, it's just going to assign it none. I'm outputting some verbose messages here. I'll come back to that here in a minute. The body of our function is just declaring a new hash table. So this is shorthand syntax for declaring a hash table. And I'm assigning that to the value of object. And you can see here in our hash table, the name is the name that we provide to the function, and the value will be assigned the value that we provide, or the default value if not provided. So I'll just show you what that looks like. In order to call functions in PowerShell, after they're declared later on in the script, you can then just call them by name. So I have here new name value pair. I use the parameter tech name and provide the value of my name 1, and then on this parameter value, I provide my value. There's a second one here that I call here without using the parameter value, so I just leave that one blank. It should have a default value assigned of none. So let's walk through here. Let's just run it, and then we can actually step through the code to kind of see what's happening. So I'm going to add a breakpoint here. That's designated by F9 in VS Code, and you can see it here on line 31. There is a red dot for a breakpoint. So we'll run it again and kind of step through what's happening. So you can see the first line that actually is executed is the line 31. So we wrote this function, but it's never actually used. It's read into memory as part of the script, but it's never actually used unless you call it. So functions are called. You can also think of them as exposed versions of commandlets. So when you have commandlets that are built into PowerShell, they built modules and they expose certain functions and functionality to create a packaged commandlet. So this commandlet may do call other functions within the script that are not exposed, or they may perform some operations and they expose that particular function as a commandlet. So it does functions for you internally. So I won't go into detail with that now, but we'll get into that later when we start talking about modules or commandlets themselves. So you can see here I stopped on it, so I'll step into my code just pressing F11 here. It hits the first line, line 14, so now we're actually calling the function. It's processing through, so it processed our parameters, and then it's going ahead and processing this write verbose. So as I mentioned before, there was this commandlet binding and these verbose lines. So when you provide a commandlet binding, what that does is take some default options that are provided in PowerShell and passes them along and sets the values in your functions. So I'll show you again here later. We'll pass over that now, but there's an option here that we can provide as tech verbose, and that'll actually start outputting these messages. So we'll do that the next time around. So bypass that, you can see no message was output, even though it says write verbose here. We create the object obj as a hash table, assign it a name and value for the ones that we provided. And you can see here now we have a hash table object with a key and value of my name 1 and my value. And then it's going to go ahead and skip the write verbose line again because again it didn't detect that the verbose option was presented or provided. And then it's going to return the object. So we just had the first object output. I'm just going to hit F5 to continue because it's going to loop through and do the same thing when we call the second line here on line 32. And there you go. So it just output the next line with my name 2 and the value of default value none. So I'll add verbose here on this round, as I mentioned before. And we'll kind of see those verbose messages output then because we told it it's going to be in verbose mode. So you can see here the first one, I didn't have verbose and it just output the values. On the other one, it actually output the verbose messages and then the value as the order of operation here. So that's just an advantage. I always recommend just adding this. There's no harm in doing it. It'll allow you, functionality as you move along to have verbose messages and regular, write host messages output. Another structure thing for functions, I always recommend if you want to actually return an object to use the return keyword. It just makes it really clear in PowerShell. Okay, so it does actually kick out. I did not know that. But if you provide the value above, it is going to output it even though you're not returning it. So again, use the return object or return whatever value you're trying to return. So it explicitly returns that value and you're not creating duplicates or outputting other information that you didn't want to be captured by the user as a return value for your function. You don't always have to return a value. If we just wanted to output verbose messages here, you can do that as well. Or if you just wanted to display information using write host from your function, that is all valuable as well. But usually when I use functions, I am trying to determine some information, put it together in a reusable object that I can use later, and then either output that information from there or use it in another function or conditional statement later on. Thanks again for watching. If you like this video or you want to see more videos like this, go ahead and drop me a like. Don't forget to subscribe as well if you want to see other computer related or programming related videos. I should have more to come this week. I'm going to try to start a new project in C#. Thanks again. Have a good day.